There are many types of ecosystems in Canada. The audio clip used in this video represents a main ecosystem found in Atlantic Canada and our coastal areas. The ocean is very large and is a habitat for many species of fish, crabs, birds, mollusks, and more. The sound shows seagulls that are in the intertidal zone, more than likely looking for prey. The intertidal zone is very important because it inhabits most of the species we can find daily along the shorelines. The intertidal zone is a very dynamic place where at low tide is exposed to air, but at high tide covered by waters and waves. There are multiple parts that make up the intertidal zone. The main parts are the lower intertidal zone, that is exposed only at low tide and typically sees less sunlight and has a cooler temperature, whereas the upper intertidal zone is exposed longer, beginning right after high tide when the water is on its way out until the next high tide. This leads to it being exposed longer, getting more sunlight, and having a bit higher temperature. Other parts of the intertidal zone include the splash zone that is not covered by water even at high tide and only receives splashes of waves. There is also the subtidal zone that is always covered by water even at the lowest tides. There have been many adaptations by species that inhabit the intertidal zone, like periwinkles, barnacles, starfish, and crab, have adapted to this environment based on their needs. Starfish, for example, are typically found lower in the intertidal zone than periwinkles due to them needing more water and not being able to be exposed to air as long. Predation affects life in the intertidal zone. Mussels are very vulnerable to predation by sea stars. Mussels tend to have higher growth rates and grow to be larger, as well as have higher survivalship when there's little to no sea stars in the area, and are smaller and found in lower abundances when there are many sea stars in the area. Since predators only kill and consume part of a prey population, the remainder of the population lives and reproduces, creating a cycle. According to the Lotka-Volterra model, when prey increases, predators also increase. When prey decreases, predators remain increasing for a bit. But as prey continues to decrease, predators decrease as well, which allows the population of the prey to increase as the predators continue to decrease, which increases the prey population again, and the cycle continues. Keystone species. Sea stars are very well studied keystone species. Although previously mentioned, when sea stars are removed from the intertidal zone, mussels have a better survival rates. In an experiment done by Payne, 1969, it was found that when removed from the intertidal zone, many other species start to diminish because predators keep prey below the carrying capacity. Keystone species decrease the likelihood of competitive exclusion and increase species diversity. The intertidal zone disturbance has great effects. Disturbance can come from a variety of factors, but most of the time, large storms and unusually powerful waves cause the disturbance in the intertidal zone, along with human interaction. Large and powerful waves can kill some animals and plants that are typically found in the intertidal zone. These waves can also move essential parts of the intertidal zone, such as large rocks inhabited by the periwinkles and barnacles. If these rocks are transported to an area in the splash zone or further on land, this will lead to barnacles and periwinkles desiccating. Human interaction also causes disturbances to the intertidal zone. Since the intertidal zone is exposed for periods of time, there's quite a lot of human interactions, and people go trampling around the intertidal zone, disturbing the organism's habitat. Two-eyed seeing is seeing the world through a combination of one eye, the strength of indigenous knowledge, and the other eye, the strength of Western knowledge. This was started to include people of all cultures into the world of science. The Western knowledge helps determine the negative changes to the ecosystems like the intertidal zone and the plants and animals found there, and typically takes a more scientific approach, while the indigenous view puts values into every single organism that inhabits our Earth, and in this case, the intertidal zone. Two-eyed seeing is very important to the study of ecology because conservation and preservation of the Earth and our intertidal zones are very needed. We should be using two-eyed seeing perspective to decrease the impacts we as humans have on our intertidal zones. There is a lot of harvesting done to the intertidal zone for a variety of reasons, such as commercial and recreational. Over-harvesting of the intertidal zone disrupts the natural habitat and affects species populations and the species diversity in the intertidal zones. This could lead to extinction of species in the intertidal zone and lead to an overall decrease in species diversity in our intertidal zones. The two-eyed seeing perspective demonstrates that this is not the proper way to obtain our resources from the intertidal zone because it harms the natural habitat created, and harvesters should reduce the human impact in the intertidal zone. Some ways this can be done is creating strict rules and regulations about harvesting practices to help the intertidal zones recover from the disruptions and to ensure that the ecosystems in the intertidal zone can thrive. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Allison Schmidt for creating the lab content and sharing her knowledge on the two-eyed seeing. I would also like to thank my TA, Shiori, for helping with questions I've had and giving me feedback. Further, I'd like to thank the Indigenous people for sharing their knowledges and practices so I can learn, and freesoundeffects.com for the audio clip played throughout this video. Here are my references.